Hi, everybody. I'm Pastor Alan Kirschbaum. This is Pastor Nathaniel from Peace Church in Otsego. I'm from Spirit of Life Lutheran Church in Caledonia, Michigan. We're coming to you for one of our first conversations that we're doing virtually. Maybe you're having some difficulty having in-depth conversations about very substantive topics because you're distant and alone in our homes. That's kind of a lonely experience. And so Pastor Nathaniel and I are trying to get together over the next 3-4 weeks here to have what we're calling good virtual conversations about some pretty important topics. But I wanted to give him an opportunity to introduce himself and to talk about some of the things that they're doing at Peace and Otsego.
Hey, Al, thank you for that. It sure is fun to do this with you. Today we are looking forward to having a conversation, like you said, on an important topic. We're going to talk about joy a little bit. And this is a very practical topic for myself. And I think it's going to be a great one for my people as well. We here as a group of people at Peace in Otsego, we are seeking ways to come together with some joy during this time. It's certainly a sad time. So looking forward to that.
We're going through many of the same emotions that every church is. And we're grieving the fact that we didn't get to have Easter together, physically present. We're grieving the fact that some of us have had funerals that we're going to where only 10 people can be there, grieving the fact that some of our loved ones are in the hospital and we're not able to see them. And so how do you have joy in the midst of that? I hear a whole lot of people talking about how do I find happiness in a time like this? And we want to make that distinction between joy and happiness. That's a big conversation. And I think it's something that we're hearing about in our culture. It's not just pastors, it's not just churches that are talking about this right now. It's something that everybody's kind of feeling, even if they don't realize the reasons why they're feeling it or what the solution is.
Because what we are experiencing now, right, you already talked about it a little bit, is this great grief that we're going through. You know, grief is what you experience when you go through loss. And for example, I don't know, you probably know David Kessler is that guy who is the expert on grieving and loss, and he's come up with the 5 stages of grief, and now they've got the 6 stages of grief. And CNN did a little interview with him, maybe, a couple weeks ago. And they asked him, you know, people are feeling a number of things right now. Is it right to call some of what they're feeling grief? And he said, yeah, we're feeling a number of different griefs. We feel the world has changed, and it has. And we know this is temporary, but it doesn't feel that way. And we realize things are going to be different. Just as going to the airport is forever different from how it was before 9/11, things will change, and this is the point at which they changed. The loss of normalcy, the fear of economic toll, the loss of connection, this is hitting us, and we're grieving collectively. We're not used to this kind of collective grief in the air. Right? So thinking about all of that loss that makes us experience grief, you got to find something to have a more positive experience while you're doing that. And you can think positive, think happiness if you'd like, but I think there's something deeper and better here for us.
Yeah, and so the question that we kind of wanted to answer that we talked about before we got on the video today is just how are we going to experience joy as we are in the midst of that grieving process? How does it happen? Is it something that I can reach out and find? Is it something that I can obtain for my own existence by doing a set of specific things? Or is grief something that comes to me? Is it even possible that I could feel joy in the middle of this grief? Is it even the idea that I could have joy at such a terrible time? I don't know if I can have that, somebody might say. And so kind of what we're going to talk about is how do I have that joy? How does it come to me? And how am I going to experience it as I continue to lose things throughout this coronavirus lockdown? And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is that joy is in fact a possible thing, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the right place to start. I'm going to share a little bit of my own personal background there. In that, I've always been one of these people that said, joy is like, happiness is not a real thing. It's so shallow. It's not important. Americans spend so much time on happiness, and I think I came at that a little bit because of reading a lot of the classics in high school and in college. Happiness for a lot of people in the history of the world has just not been an important part of life. There was so much grief and death and loss and disappointment and hurt that even to this day, a lot of people don't worry about happiness. And so then on top of that, joy seems like another level on top of that. but I've kind of gone through some evolution and some growth about that, and it's been a cool thing. And the other day I found myself saying to my wife and to my family, I am happy. I'm happy right now. And that was really a neat thing to get to. It reminded me joy is possible. Now I realize we're going to talk about the difference between joy and happiness, but that was an encouragement for me. And I think every time I look at a Christian at a funeral, and I'm sure you've had the same experience, and this Christian is saying to me, yeah, we are sad that we lost our dad, or our mom, but we are so glad and thankful that they are at rest. They are with Jesus now, and we have real joy. I think to myself, yeah, joy has got to be a real thing. I mean, this is not a fake thing. If you can say that as you mourn your parents, it's real.
As I think of the examples in my existence where I see people experience joy, very often it is in the midst of those difficult times. And this is how I see it show up. And I'm hearing it in what you're saying. Somebody has a job loss. They may not indeed be happy in that moment, but they pepper the conversation with joy-filled phrases. So, Pastor, I lost my job, but I am happy that this happened. But I have this inner joy that has come to me in the midst of this problem. Pastor, I know we couldn't meet at church for Easter, but this was joy-filled in a different way. You gave the example of a funeral. I know that I've lost my loved one, but I am joyful because I know the joy that they are experiencing right now. And so joy is certainly possible. And maybe some of you that are watching this have said to yourselves, that's kind of what I want. I want to be able to have that attitude, that feeling of joy in the midst of a difficult time. And one of the things that I've always said to people when they kind of ask me, why did I become a pastor? Why does the church exist? Of course it is to tell people about Jesus and how to get to heaven. But I think there's a misconception that the purpose of the church, the purpose of a pastor is to bring happiness to me, to change my life, to make it something better, when really you could look at the purpose of the church and the pastor and the word that God gives to you is to give you joy in the midst of pain and sadness, not to take you necessarily out of the muck of your life. That muck is still going to always be there, but to instead to show you that I'm going to sit with you in that and still find a way to be joyful as God gives me that joy in my existence. And so maybe that leads us into our next thing where we talk about, so if joy is possible, then how do I obtain it? How do I have that type of attitude during these difficult times that we're going through? When I think of happiness or joy or peace or any of those positive things that people would want to have in their life, everybody wants to have a map for how to obtain it. And so I'm going to go seek out a counselor. I'm going to go watch some Tony Robbins. I'm going to go watch some YouTube videos, read a book that tells me these 10 to 15 ways that I will obtain this positive emotion in my life. I don't know that joy simply is this emotional thing where I can climb a ladder to get it. Instead, I believe that it's something that has to be given and shown consistently throughout difficult times in order for you to have it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to start saying it. And, I've always thought there's an example of Martin Luther. He's a helpful example here because we're talking about people having joy at a funeral. And when he lost his daughter, Magdalene, he specifically said how did he put it here? Among other things, he said then, in the last 1,000 years, God has given to no bishop such great gifts as he has given to me. For one should certainly boast of God's gifts. I'm angry with myself that I'm unable to rejoice from my heart and be thankful to God right now. Right. So there's no 12-step, 5-step, 7-step program that you can embark on. I mean, you got a guy like Luther, great scholar, great theologian, just a good guy for a lot of in a lot of areas all around, right? Great musician. And yet when he loses his daughter, he can't force himself to have joy. Now, he's by far not the only example. C.S. Lewis made this point. C.S. Lewis says, you've got to really, joy has to be sharply distinguished from both happiness and pleasure. Joy has one characteristic and one only in common with them. The fact that anybody who has experienced joy is going to want it again. But then joy is never in our power, and pleasure often is. Think about that, right? Joy is never in our power, and pleasure often is. I can tell you the things to do, and you know them as well as I do, right? To get happiness in your life.
I can make sure that I'm in this income bracket, not making so much that I have more money, more problems, right? And so not making so much that I complicate my life, but not making so little that I end up with poverty level and I feel like I just don't have what I need. And so I can try to improve my income. I can try to improve my education to be more happy. I can go to some counseling to try to obtain some better career decisions and things like that.
That's it. Right.
But
you got to have the right number of social connections.
Right. But none of those things will really bring me true joy in the midst of sadness. They can bring temporary happiness.
That's it. Yeah. And I still have always found, again, Luther to be that great example of that, because he had all of those things. I mean, he had incredible career success. He had the right amount of income, not too much, not too little. He has the right number of connections, and yet still no joy. You can't force it. You just cannot force that.
And so right now we have a lot of people in our culture who are, based on these articles that we're reading, suffering grief, suffering, yes, lack of happiness, but also at a base, not feeling joy because of the grieving process that they are going through, the things that they are losing. And so maybe what we want to say to them today is that you can experience joy. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the best time for you to experience joy is when you are experiencing that grieving process. When you are losing things, that's when joy is most poignant. That's when joy and the joy that God gives has the greatest opportunity to show up.
That's it. Yep. But then the don't force yourself to find it. I mean, in that, if you are sitting here going through this time right now, right, and you are stressing and you're saying, I just don't feel happy, I don't feel glad, there's got to be something wrong in my life. Maybe I'm not making enough money. Maybe I haven't contacted enough friends. Maybe I'm not getting out enough. I should do all these other things differently. Maybe those are good things that you should do. I don't know all the details of your life, but you're not going to necessarily get joy by forcing yourself to do all these things differently. So rather than forcing all the life change, let's dig a little bit into the loss that you're experiencing and realize that the loss is what allows joy to come about.
And I think about that in my own pastoral relationships with people and my relationships with friends, where some people are, and sometimes even myself, we're grasping so hard to try to find this happiness. So I lose someone in my life, and now I'm going to go to 18 different counselors trying to find that miracle answer.
Yep.
Miracle thing.
The silver bullet.
A book, the silver bullet that changes my life dramatically around. And the answer might be, you need to feel this right now. You need to go through the grieving process right now. So extrapolate that into this coronavirus situation. Were there things that we needed to grieve right now? Were there things that maybe we lost that we needed to lose to teach us something? Is this taking us to a place where in our grief, God can show us joy in the biggest way?
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I would never want to say in the abstract about like somebody without actually knowing their life and their story that, hey, there's something that you need to grieve and experience the loss from before you're going to feel joy. But I know from enough other people who have gone through the experience that is kind of the way it goes, right? And you got to let it happen. Apostle Paul, right? The Apostle Paul is an awesome example of that. The Apostle Paul experienced so much loss in his life, and yet what was the time where he was the most joyful, or at least that he commented about his joy the most, is writing in the book of the Philippians, right? Paul is sitting in prison in Rome, and he says, rejoice in the Lord.
Yeah, and rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. So this idea that he's not saying rejoice in the Lord when you're happy. He is, but he's also saying rejoice when things are really kind of bad. And there's a whole bunch of different examples in the scriptures that talk to us about people receiving joy from God, from Christ, even in the midst of a grieving process, even in the midst of difficult times. And I think, we talk about Paul in Philippians, how he is rejoicing while he's in jail. But I think John 16 gives us another example, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think John 16 is even kind of the crux of the matter, is where Jesus makes his crucial promise on how joy will come to us. And so I'm going to actually, if it's okay, I want to read that for us. Do you mind if I read that little section to us? So John 16, Jesus makes this promise to his disciples. He says, in a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me. At this, some of his disciples said to one another, what does he mean by saying, in a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me, and because I am going to the Father? They kept asking, what does he mean by a little while? We don't understand what he's saying. And Jesus saw that they wanted to ask him about this, and so he said to them, are you asking one another what I meant when I said, in a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me? Very truly I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. And so with you. Now is your time of grief, but I will see you again and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. In that day you will no longer ask me anything. Very truly I tell you, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. Until now you've not asked for anything in my name. Ask and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. Right? So now Jesus in this section, he just promises, he says, okay, here's how your joy becomes complete. But you notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, well, your joy is going to be dependent on having good circumstances. In fact, what he says is, your joy is going to come because you go through a time of grief. And in fact, like a woman who has to give birth to a baby, you're going to experience the pain and the sorrow, the hardship of that. And then your joy will come into completion. But then you realize, what is he talking about when he uses this picture of a woman giving birth? Because you think the disciples don't give birth to anything. I mean, they're not doing any of the work here. When Jesus says, in a little while, this is all going to happen, you think, well, wait a second. The disciples, all that happens after this time of Jesus' life is that he gets arrested, he gets crucified, he dies, and then he rises from the dead. And so what's this whole birth thing that's coming about? And Jesus, what he's really drawing on is the picture that he himself is going to give birth to a new creation for us and for the entire world. Jesus is saying, I am willing to, like a woman giving birth, go through the pain and the agony and the loss of death so that you and the rest of the world might have life. And you're going to discover, when I rise from the dead on Easter morning, a joy that you never imagined. What an awesome thing Jesus then is giving us a picture here of saying, I am willing to go through loss so that you can receive. And I think this is the profound picture of the great exchange, isn't it? I mean, in that God gives up his gifts and his goodness and everything else so that in our loss, we can be filled up and our joy can be complete. That's why I think the Bible is giving us the best picture, but it matches what culturally we know, in that we don't get real happiness, real joy apart from experiencing loss. We can't get filled up with what God gives as long as we're filled up with all our own stuff. It's only when we, like that woman, we experience the loss that we get what Jesus gives.
And that goes along with Pastor Steve Otto used to kind of say it this way. He would tell me, he's like, the best time when I like to share God's word with somebody is when they're in the hospital. Not that he wanted anybody to go to the hospital, but why did he say that? The time that you're most filled up with joy, the time that you listen to God's joy-filled message the most is when you're on your back and you're not trying to do something for yourself. It's when you can do nothing. It's when grief has weighed you down that you see the one who removes grief.
That's right.
And so, I think of the clearest example. The first funeral that I ever did was for a 20-some-year-old a boy named Seth. And I remember how traumatic that was. It seemed like it was a month that the parents and I were in the hospital with him trying to make difficult decisions, what to do for his care. And I remember his dad sitting in the hospital, holding this picture of Jesus like this, just trying to stay close in any tangible way that he felt like he could. That was not a joyous time. There was no way that those parents could have reached out to anything to find happiness. And yet, when he died, I remember them saying, Seth is with Jesus right now. Seth is rejoicing right now. And that made a grieving parent feel joy for their son. In this existence where we're having things taken away and we're going through this grieving process, the fact that we are knocked down gives our eyes the opportunity to look up at something that's far more special than anything the world could offer to us, and that Jesus would give. And you look at that example of the disciples, the few of them that were at the cross, Mary, Jesus' mother, that is the depth of sadness for that mom, for John, the disciple he loved. That's the depth of sadness. Born out of that sadness was the greatest joy. The fact that they could live every day knowing what was in store in heaven, the fact that one day they would obtain that in their present reality, that joy that exists there too. And so you and I possess that. God's people possess that because he gave it to us. Nonetheless, though, we still live in a sinful world. We still live in a world that tries to rob joy from us. The fact is that the devil, the world, and my sinful flesh is going to try to rob the joy that I have received from my God. And so there's a few things that I've thought of that are joy stealers, if you want to call them that, in my life. Maybe for you who are watching this, maybe you have a particular person in your life, and maybe it's not even that person's intention, but maybe they are the kind of person that just every word that they say seems so hurtful that it causes you to, instead of look up at the heaven that is in store, you look down at the grief, you look down at the conflict, you look down at the difficulty. And so I think that's one of the things that you have to watch out for, is that our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the devil in this world. And so the devil's going to use interpersonal relationships to try to steal your joy, to make you say, this person is so irritating to me right now that I forget all that is good that God has given me. You think about the very people that we love, the devil can use them to try to rob us of our joy. And really, those are the relationships that we would want to be amplifying our joy.
I mean, you're so right. These are the relationships that we want to. One thing we watch out for is not just interpersonal relationships, in the vague sense, right? But the people who are pointing us back into ourselves as our source of joy, or the people who are pushing us to work harder. Another thing that I watch out for is the fear of change. Loss is always a reality. Every time we experience change, there is something that we lose and something that we gain, but it's the fear of that change that makes me interpret the loss as a bigger, or the fear of the change that makes me interpret the change as a greater loss than it actually is. And when I can accept the change and even embrace it as for what it births next, then there's a much greater chance that I will experience joy in it. I think about for me, one of the hard examples there has simply been coming back from overseas. I loved what I got to do overseas, and it was so hard to accept the reality that I had to embrace this new life, this new ministry, and everything that it would entail. And for example, I was really afraid that I was going to lose my Chinese. And then as I lost my Chinese language, and I lost my Chinese friends, and I lost my Chinese connections, and I would not be the interesting person that I had hoped and dreamed that I was, right? But embracing the loss means that, yeah, I lost a little bit of the Chinese, but I also got all the new skills, the friends, the relationships, the abilities, all of those things. And it opens up all kinds of joy. I don't think I ever would have the experiences that I've had since then. Like I participated in this coaching program and I made just some of the best relationships of my life. I would have never had that if I hadn't accepted the fact that, okay, I lost some of the Chinese and the networks and the connections there. That's okay, right? So watch out for the fear of change.
When I fear some change, there's always a grieving process when something changes and we lose something from the past. And that is kind of the way that the sinful world works. We grieve something that is lost, that is going to change, but fearing that, being held captive by it and being stuck in this past self, it keeps me from enjoying something in the future.
That's it.
And so now I think about the people that we care for in our churches. Do we have something to grieve? Yeah, we didn't get to celebrate Easter Sunday in person. And so I can spend a lot of time saying, oh my gosh, I miss this and grieve this and miss all the joy that's going to come in the future that maybe, and I don't want to be saying that, oh, God is doing this right now. The only assurance that I have is from his word. But God does work in these things to produce joy-filled events. And so I have been telling my people here at Spirit of Life that there is indeed a time for us to, if you want to call it, put on the sackcloth and ashes and just have a cry about it.
Yep.
Embrace the suck, if you want to call it that. So I'm gonna take a minute and I am just gonna cry because I remember, what is it, Psalm 42? I remember walking in and leading the procession into the house of God, and it stinks to not be able to do that right now. But boy, I got hundreds of people watching a service now online that wouldn't have otherwise watched it. And so for our people, I think it's important, don't allow these things that are happening right now to paralyze you with fear because something is changing. Instead, remember the joy that you have in heaven and see that joy and realize that all of these different things that we're going through right now are just opportunities for the joy to show itself more and more. One of the ways that we can not lose the joy that we have is, I think, by being more thankful for the things that we go through. And so is there a prayer that maybe I can say thank you? Maybe I can react with gratitude instead of hostility.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the best practices you can do on the positive side to keep your joy, is to practice gratitude. I know a lot of people who make a little gratitude journal, and that's one of the best things that they can do. Brene Brown is an expert on this kind of stuff, and she says in all of her research, she says the relationship between joy and gratitude was one of the important things I found in my research. I wasn't expecting it. In my 12 years of research on 11,000 pieces of data, I did not interview one person who had described themselves as joyful, who also did not actively practice gratitude. If you're going to have joy, you're going to have to be grateful.
One of the things that changed my life was when I got a prayer journal. And on the top of it, the first thing I did was I consciously said, I need to say thank you for this list of things. And it was amazing how difficult it was for me to even write all of the things on that list. And by the time I got to the things that I wanted to gripe about or ask for, I had spent most of my time saying thank you. And I wasn't so upset anymore. Now, I'm not going to say that that happens to you every time you go through that magical list. But objectively, it does help to refocus you on the things that are joy-filled in your existence. And maybe it's just a good thing to remember, no matter what happens, every single day that I wake up, I have heaven in store for me. And so that helps me to go through the grief that I have here, that no matter where I am in this process of grief, no matter what I've lost, God has not robbed me of my joy throughout those steps.
And then along with that, that there was nothing in this world and even nothing in all of eternity that Jesus prized more than you. He was willing, you were talking about loss. I mean, right, there was everything. He was willing to give up everything so that he could have you, so that he could claim you as his own, put his identity on you, mark you with his name and say, you're my own. And if, I don't know, to me, if that doesn't bring you joy to think that you've got everything that he wants to give you, I don't know what possibly can. I mean, right.
And I find this verse to be articulating exactly what you just said. Jesus says to his disciples, I'll read it for you. He says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full.
That's right.
I think what he's saying is that he wants you to be able to look at the messed up world and still have life and still have joy, and still have a joy for today, a joy that reflects upon the eternal joy that we will enjoy, that we will have with Jesus in heaven. The thief, the devil, is indeed prowling around like a roaring lion, and he is at every venue in your existence trying to steal that from you. But God, who has defeated him on the cross and in the empty tomb, God who has stomped on Satan's head, desires you to have joy. So as you start to feel those things ripped away from you, as you start to grieve in this difficult time, remember the fact that God wants you to be joyful. Remember the fact that he gave you joy on the cross and in the empty tomb. And so it's his intention for you to have it. And maybe one of the things, as pastors, we have the opportunity to go through resources because it's our job to sit down and read. I know you've got a couple of resources that you wanted to share with the friends who are watching this video.
Two things that I've particularly appreciated reading over the years. Matt Harrison's president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and he wrote a really neat little book on joy. He calls it A Little Book on Joy. When it came to my own journey of it coming to the experience of having a solid identity, a solid sense of my person that has some joy in life, the loss and finding joy in becoming the person that God called me to be. I don't think, though, there's been anything that's more helpful than Tim Keller's book, The Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness. He calls it The Path to True Christian Joy, but it's super helpful. Love it.
Thanks for those resources. The two resources that I was going to direct you all to is, first of all, I think that if you're a member of a church, it may be that your church is already offering a grief share group, an opportunity for people to get together. Maybe they're doing it virtually right now, where you can have people that know the joy of Jesus Christ, and can share that during difficult times together. I think that would be good. If you're a member of a church that doesn't have a grief share group, maybe that's something that you could speak to your pastor directly about. And then the other one that I'd recommend is from our publishing house, Northwestern Publishing House. If you go to nph.net, type in the search bar grief devotionals. There's a set of devotionals called Out of the Depths. And so this idea right now that we're losing stuff, we're in the depths of our sadness, the depths of our grief. And it's, I believe, a 3-step book that you can read to learn about joy in the Bible in multiple ways and how it showed up in the Bible at difficult times. And that's where some of my information came from for our talk today. So I'm really thankful, Pastor Timmerman, that you could get together with me today from Peace and Otsego. Really thankful that we could have a good conversation over the next couple of weeks. I think we're going to have more good conversations on Wednesday evenings. We hope that you'll join us to talk about grace, to talk about hope. And as you watch these videos, maybe you can do a shout out to your members. What I'd love for the friends of Spirit of Life who are watching this video, shoot us your comments and your questions in the box below the video, because we want to know what you want to talk about. We want to know how you're reacting to this video, because believe it or not, it's the first time that any of us have tried to do this on camera. It's really easy for us to do on the phone, one-on-one, but trying to articulate our discussions with all of you present, that's a new animal. So we love your comments.
I would agree, and I'll have to close this way. I got the joy down in my heart. Every time I talk about joy, man, I just got to sing that a little bit. So anyway,
absolutely, all of you have God's joy in your heart too, because that's what He gave you on the cross, and that's what He gave you in the empty tomb. And so, rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. Jesus loves you, and we can't wait to see you next Wednesday at 7 p.m. God bless y'all.
Blessings. Bye.